Who am I? Who am I? We spend our whole life trying to answer this question. But this leads us to another question. Who are we? Every one of us has communities of others we belong to. Our identity as individuals overlaps with our collective identities. I have asked the question, who am I as a Vancouverite, as a British Columbian? How might these communities I'm a part of contribute to my sense of identity? We are a product of our past, and who we are today influences who we will be tomorrow. Winston Churchill said, "The farther back you look, the further forward you see." I decided to mine our history in search of narratives for answers to the questions, who am I? Who are we? What is our creation story, our founding myths? I was surprised by what I discovered. Did you know that modern British Columbia was founded by a black man married to an Aboriginal woman? They spoke French at home. That French was the original working language of our non-native communities in British Columbia. That before Victoria, our capital was Vancouver. Not this Vancouver. It's now called Vancouver, Washington, when proto-British Columbia stretched down to California. That our province, British Columbia, is named after the territory around our old capital on the Columbia River. The old Vancouver was multicultural and remarkably secular. It even had its own Aboriginal-based language, Chinook Wawa. Many of you still speak Chinook Wawa when you use words like skookum, potlatch, muckymuck, saltchuck. The story of the loss of Vancouver and the founding of this new Vancouver is an important drama of our history. We can understand the society we live in better if we understand what came before. I began creating short video blogs of my search for identity. I thank TEDxVancouver for inviting me to share a few today. This is the first time I've ever shared them with the public, and I'd be interested in your comments. I hope these videos encourage your interest in history. Studying our past can help you answer your questions. Who am I? Who are we? Thank you. Before 1850, British Columbia was just called Columbia. It stretched from California to Alaska, including the Panhandle. Its capital was Vancouver on the Columbia River. It was the largest settlement on the West Coast, governing over 30 communities connected by brigades. The New Caledonia Brigade, the California Brigade, the Snake River and Langley Brigades, all centered on Vancouver. A fleet of Vancouver ships served its coastal communities, including the first steamship, the SS Beaver. Vancouver was the original terminal city, with brigades coming and going from the Hudson Bay and Montreal. Its ships traveled to Honolulu and London with products from its farms, sawmills, fisheries, distributed around the world. Vancouver was the cultural center of the West Coast. It had the first school, with students from 1,000 kilometers away, the first theatrical plays, library, hospital, the first teachers, doctors, supported the first artists and scientists of renown. Vancouver was the biggest industrial center, with shipbuilding, a foundry, mills operating through the night. It had blacksmiths, millwrights, coopers. Its farms, herds, orchards, and industrial bakery served all of Columbia and beyond. Vancouver had 35 ethnic groups. 30% were Hawaiian. A new native-based language, Chinook Wawa, developed in Vancouver and from there spread throughout Columbia. The first governor of Columbia was John McLaughlin, part French. His deputy was James Douglas, part black. Both married Aboriginal women, and their families lived in the governor's mansion. First Nations people were central to the economy, providing most of the export goods, protecting the trading communities. A ban on missionaries in Western British territories and strict controls on European settlement helped maintain peace and traditional native cultures. U.S. efforts to establish a presence on the West Coast were short-lived. Britain extended its laws there, the U.S. did not, and it imposed foreign import duties. McLaughlin authorized intensive trapping near the eastern border, and American fur traders decreased from 500 to 50. McLaughlin outcompeted U.S. trading ships, which eventually abandoned the coast. For almost half a century, Columbia, this proto-British Columbia, sustained a multicultural society around its capital, Vancouver, living in peace with First Nations people. Its presence was so powerful that the United States and ambivalent British politicians had to accept the reality of a Columbia on the West Coast. To these people, we owe the existence of British Columbia. Would negotiations or war determine the U.S. border? A U.S. agent described Willamette Valley farmers as loyal Canadians. A French report agreed that the Columbia River area should remain British. Almost all U.S. newcomers stayed south of the Columbia River, which they assumed would be the border. But U.S. President Polk refused an international tribunal. In London, Lord Palmerston defended British commitment to the Columbia River, but an election saw Lord Aberdeen, an appeaser, take his place. President Polk was a slave owner who wanted to expand slavery in the South. He needed to resolve the northern border so he could attack Mexico. He couldn't risk war with both Britain and Mexico. When negotiations began, not a single American lived north of the Columbia River. Polk made his aggressive opening offer, the 49th parallel. The British ambassador refused to even forward it to London, so no counter-offer could be made. Polk withdrew his offer and threatened war. Aberdeen agreed so hastily, he left Point Roberts and the San Juan Islands in the U.S. Aberdeen did not offer the Whidbey Island option, which would have given the U.S. its strategic goals. What Douglas called that monstrous treaty abandoned Columbia and 90% of his people and infrastructure. It was ratified just before Lord Palmerston returned to power. With Britain neutralized, the U.S. declared war on Mexico and annexed enough land to offset its northern windfall. When Oregon's first governor, a slave owner, arrived, James Douglas, who descended from slaves, prepared to leave. On May 19, 1849, Douglas left Vancouver and Columbia for good, leading a caravan to his new capital, Victoria. He left behind a land full of place names, lasting reminders of the Columbia that was, but he brought Chinookwawah, the trade language that symbolized the old Columbia, its multicultural values and respect for Native people. The U.S. Army began 3 decades of wars against the First Nations former allies of Columbia. Native violence was directed at U.S. settlers. Columbians were suspected of being collaborators. Some tried to help their old allies. William Tolmie returned from Victoria to defend Chief Leschi, whose brother had been murdered in the office of the first Washington governor, Isaac Stevens, but the chief was executed as a criminal. Columbia was gone, as was its capital, Vancouver. But soon a new Columbia and a new Vancouver would arise in the north. This will be one of the greatest cities in the Dominion. It needs a name befitting its dignity and importance. I will name it Vancouver. So said William Van Horn. Later, he claimed it was a good name because people in the East knew approximately where it was. But this was a defense, not a reason. Van Horn worked for Donald A. Smith, Lord Strathcona, building the Canadian Pacific Railway. He had 2 symbolic places to name, its nexus and its terminus. For the nexus, he turned to Smith. When things looked hopeless, Lord Strathcona would shout his clan's battle cry, Craigellachie. Did he also inspire the name of the terminus? Smith worked for Honorable Hudson Bay Company, sponsored by his uncle John Stewart, administrator of New Caledonia. Stewart led the 1st Brigade down the Columbia River and supported the creation of the new capital of Columbia, Vancouver. Smith worked directly for William Connolly, father-in-law of James Douglas, then acting governor in Vancouver. Connolly had led the 1st Brigade to Vancouver. Smith pointed out to Van Horn where his other uncle had drowned on Brigade to Vancouver. The old Vancouver had been the original terminal city, where brigades from the east ended their journeys. It had been the capital of the British-governed territory of Columbia, but was abandoned in 1860 after the border treaty. The leadership in Victoria were well aware of the name Vancouver and its connotations of capital. The bill to name it was the most controversial of 1886. Americans had changed the name of Old Vancouver to Columbus, then back again. They were against the proposal. Despite the opposition, Van Horn persisted. Supportive politicians got streets named after them, like Drake, Davie, Robson, Dunsmuir, Smythe. Did Van Horn call the terminus Vancouver as a tribute to Lord Strathcona, this name that had loomed so large in his life? Was the railroad like a modern-day brigade crossing the continent? Both Vancouvers were terminal cities, both the largest centers of industry, commerce, culture, and education. Both were on the mouths of the greatest rivers and territories that were both named Columbia. They were both places of cultural diversity, where Chinook Wawa was widely spoken. Was the new Vancouver meant to be a continuation of the old Vancouver, where the ideals and values of the lost capital might thrive once again? We live in a world created by the early surveyors, where they placed their posts were final. Even mistakes made on the U.S. border remain legally binding. Once established, street systems are resilient. They have survived nuclear bombs and catastrophic fires. Edmund Gunter standardized the measurement of land. Gunter's 66-foot chain became the measure of our urban world. Vancouver roads are 1 or 1.5 chains wide. Our blocks are 4 chains wide and 6 or 8 chains long. Our homes often have 1/2 or 1 chain of frontage. An exception is the 100-foot chain used on CPR properties. Royal Engineer Colonel Moody anchored our region on the coast meridian, where the ocean meets the 49th parallel. He insisted cities be north of the Fraser River to defend against the U.S. He built New Westminster as the capital, then North Road and Kingsway to supply it. He set aside military reserves, which became UBC, Stanley Park, Jericho Park, Central Park. He laid out Hastings Town Site to Nanaimo Street. Fraser Street connected the Fraser River. His Granville Government Reserve became the CPR land grant to entice the railway west and anchor the new Vancouver. 6 square-mile townships created baselines and range lines that form borders of our cities, like North Road and Boundary Road. Colonel Moody laid out the skeleton of the region and was the first of many important Vancouver planners. Gunter had reconciled the ancient measures based on 4 with the newer ones based on 10. In Gunter's world, each chain has 4 rods, but also 100 links. 10 chains make a furlong, which an ox could plow before resting. 8 furlongs make a mile. An acre is 1 furlong by 1 chain, which an ox could plow in 1 day. Colonel Moody made each street and avenue in the Fraser Valley 1 furlong. Every 8th makes 1 mile. In Richmond, he made the distance between number 1 road and number 2 road 1 mile. Throughout Western Canada, 6 square-mile townships make 36 sections of 640 acres. We live in the world these early measurers created. They both limit and liberate us to live our urban lives.